to download, I want to just take a moment, talk about Rav Yehuda Kelmer, Zichrono Livracha, who just passed away on Shabbat. Rav Kelmer was fairly well known in the States. When I knew him, I first met him when I was in Boston in 1976, and when I came to sort of settle in Boston, I went to all the Rabbanim in the community to offer my services as a Sofer Stam. And at that time, there was no Sofer Stam in Boston. They used to, somebody would come from time to time, and because of that and because of all kinds of politics, I was not immediately accepted in the wider community. But I want to say Rabbi Kelmer was the first one of all the Rabbanim that I met who really greeted me. And he was very excited, actually, that I came. He said that they needed a sofer to write the Gittin. And he sent me to Rav Savitsky, who I'm sure I've mentioned in the past. And it was through Rabbi Kelmer that I met Rav Savitsky and became close to Rav Savitsky. But it was Rabbi Kelmer himself was Mesader Gittin Tachat Pikuach Shel Rav Savitsky. That's why he sent me there. And over the years, I got to know him very well. He was I was talking at the shir I gave yesterday, and I don't know which to say about him first, that he was a tzaddik or a Talmid Chacham, but he was, I can't say that he was more one than the other. He was a phenomenal tzaddik and a phenomenal Talmid Chacham, all the while being the rabbi of a shul, which I think, honestly, is the most challenging position that any rabbi can have, is to be a rabbi of a shul. It's an extremely challenging position. And this is a man who literally just devoted himself in phenomenal ways. He would tell me if I need to speak to him, I should try calling him after about 1 o'clock in the morning, because usually by then he had finished his other phone calls. And I never completely understood exactly when and how long he slept, because I think he told me once that after I finished speaking to him, maybe 1 or 1:30, that he would stay up learning for a couple more hours, and then he would get up for minyan, which was, I think, at 7. I think I also figured out at one point that he took a nap for like an hour or two after minyan, but anyway, he passed away. He left Boston shortly before I left Boston to go to West Hempstead in New York, and he was the rabbi there ever since. I don't know the cause of death. He was not, I don't know how old he was either, but he wasn't terribly old. I can't imagine that he was more than in his mid to late 70s. But I don't know. It's a tremendous loss, and I hadn't been in close touch with him. I actually, once I left to Israel and he had already gone to West Hempstead, I only spoke to him over the years maybe once or twice, and I didn't want to try to call him unless it was something really pressing, because I knew how precious his time was, and I never wanted to take time away from his kihila. But he was really an exceptional person, and I hope I have occasion to speak about him again. And I want to dedicate the learning that we're doing tonight in his memory. So, okay, so we keep, I keep trying to build up different things for this year. I still want to go back, and I want to look at the Beit HaMoked, and I want to look at the lighting of the menorah. but on balance, I decided, and I've been preparing sugyot of the Gemara that have to do with both of those things. Several dapim I've already prepared, but I haven't given them yet because I haven't done all of the ones that I want to do yet. And I decided also that on balance, I think I may have alluded to this last time, I think it's better for the time being that we press on. Oh, Michael Werner did come. I think it's better that we press on in Tamid, and today we're going to be looking at the beginning of the 4th chapter of Tamid, and I also want to look at a couple of Mishnayot in Midot. Truthfully, we should go through all of Midot so that we have a better understanding of the entire layout, but I'm trying to do that for you sort of piecemeal along the way, but it is helpful. There's also a downside to it because, like many other things that we've come across, and as you would expect, there's not always a universal agreement on exactly where things were and exactly how they were placed. And we're going to try to tackle one of those things today. So the first thing I want to look at is what I sent you from the Mishnah. Just a second. Hello, Michael Werner.
Hello.
Hi, how are you feeling?
I felt better. Baruch Hashem, as they say.
The voice. That was enough.
I couldn't hear you.
I wish you had washed them up.
Toda Rabba.
I heard your voice is a little bit damaged. All the
Yeah.
best for you.
Not sure why my screen isn't sharing. Oh no, here it is. Okay. 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 So at the end of the previous parak, right, which we spent some time on, we talked about the cleaning of the menorah and the mizbeach haktoret. And we understood that the shechita of the Korban Tamid didn't start until they could hear the opening of the Heichal. So at the end of the chapter there, it told us what was going on from inside of the Heichal. And now we're switching back to discuss the shechita and the preparation of the Korban Tamid. Oh. Okay, so for those, just in case you're joining me right now, which at least one of you is, I sent in the chat the 2 files. The first is it's the first page of the 4th chapter of Tamid, which is up on my screen, and the second one is a picture of the Rambam's drawing of the Beit HaMikdash, which we will consult in a little bit. Okay.
Could you resend that? I think if we joined late, we only get the chats from the moment that we joined.
Okay, I was afraid of that. I think you're right, though. Okay, hang on 1 second. Mishnah Tamid. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to start in the meantime, but you should get the files in another few seconds. Okay, But without further delay, Lo hayu choftin et hataleh, ele makdin oto. So they didn't. We'll see in the Bartanur what the difference between koftin and makdin is, right? It means that they didn't tie. It's the idea that you tie the front legs together and the hind legs together. But and the Akedah was with the front to the hind and the front to the hind on both sides. Misha zachu be'evarim ochazim, those who were zocheh in the evarim, right? The people who won the limb. It didn't mean that they were zochim ba'averim. Who were evarim? What's that a reference to? When were they zocheh?
By lottery, by pious.
Exactly. So in the Pais, we had this in Yoma, and we had it also here in Tamid. Yeah. So in the Pais, it was Mishochet Mizarek Mimid Hashem Mizbeach HaPnimi. Hang on one second. Mizbeach HaMimid Hashem Et HaMenorah. Mimale Evarim Lekevesh. All right, so this is the order that we're going in, more or less, right? So after Shchita, so this is what happened. At the end of the chapter, we saw that the people who do the Dishun Mizbeach HaPnimi and the Dishun HaMenorah, they open up the door to the Heichal, and then the person who is going to Shecht would Shecht. So that's the order, essentially, that we're going in here. So the Shchita would happen just before these people would start their work inside. So that the Shchita would happen. There would be Kabbalat Adam and Zrika, and then they had to take the Evarim up to the Kevesh, up to the ramp of they had to take the limbs of the animal that were being cut up onto the ramp going up to the Mizbeach, right? And then it was divided into various people, Harosh v'regel, Shtei hayadayim, ha'oketz v'regel, ha'chazeh v'agera, Shtei tfanot, ha'kravayim, right? So there was a lot of people, right? There were a lot of different parts, and there were a lot of different people that had to take them up. So here it says, Misha zachu be'evarim ochazim ba. The ones who, in the lottery, that their job, the job that they won was to bring up Evarim, they would hold on to it. They would hold on to the sheep that was going to be the Korban Tamid. V'kach hayta akedato, and this was its binding. Rosho ledarom, ufanav lema'arav. Its head was pointed south, and its face was facing west, which we'll get a better idea of that in a second from the picture. Hashochet omed b'mizrach, ufanav lema'arav. The one who shechted, he would stand in the east, and he would be facing west. So here, let's get an idea of what that would look like. I'm going to use this picture from the Rambam, but I'm going to use another picture which I didn't send you as well. But I also just thought it would be interesting to see the Rambam's picture, and this will be easier for us to understand another Mishnah that I'm going to do in Midot in a moment. But let's blow this up. So the picture, as you understand, it's mostly an overhead view, except the Mizbeach, which, right, the Mizbeach and the Kevesh, the Mizbeach and the ramp, is a side view. So let's just get our direction straight again. This is the south side over here, and this is the north side over here. And then, of course, then this will be, up here is going to be west, and below that is going to be east. And so what we just said is that the positioning of the keves is going to be, its head is going to be pointed south. Oh, can I make myself louder? I'll try. I think I just have to speak more loudly. I'll do my best. Okay, I hope that's better. Roshola Darom Ufanav Ma'arav. So its head was pointed south, and its face was pointed west. Okay. Sorry, I'm switching between things here, and I'm always a little unsure. Okay, so we'll see in a moment that it was somewhere over here. We'll describe in a moment as best we can exactly where it was. So the keves would be on the north side of the Mizbeach, and its head would be pointed here we go. Its head would be pointed southwards. In that direction, and its face would be facing westwards, that direction. Okay. Let's continue in the Mishnah. Oh, and the shochet, he would be here. 1 second. He'll be here in the east, and he will be facing, his face is going to also be facing westward. So remember now, this is early in the morning. The sun is rising in the east down here. And there's going to be shadows in different parts of the Beit HaMikdash as the sun is rising. And that's, just a second. That'll be relevant, a little more relevant in a moment. So, so he was in the east, in other words, he was east of the keves, he was east of the sheep, and he's facing west, facing toward the Heichal, toward the Ulam, toward the Beit HaMikdash. Shel Shachar haya nishchat al keren tzfonit ma'aravit shel taba'at shniya. So the Korban Tamid that was done in the morning was shechted on the northwest corner on the second ring. We'll describe the rings in a moment, but if you look at the, I'm not going to switch back and forth for a minute. If you look at what I sent you where I was making the little arrows to the right of the Mizbeach, which would be to the north of the Mizbeach, there's like a rectangle there that says Tabaot. And those were, there were 24 rings, which we'll describe in a moment. And that's where they would bring the korbanot to be shechted, at least anything that was korban that was kodesh kodeshim, right? So you may know that, right? We have let's say 2 levels of kedusha in the the animal, not just the animal, but in the animal korbanot, we have Kodshe Kodshim, which would include the Korban Tamid, and we have Kodshim Kalim, which could be shechted anywhere in the Azorah. But right now we're talking about the Tamid, and it's Kodshe Kodshim, so they would shecht it there at the Tabaot, at these rings. So that was the morning one. Shilbein ha'arbaim, since they're talking, they're going to tell us the one that was the Korban Tamid that was done in the afternoon. Haya nishchat al keren mizrachit tzfonit. It was done on the northeast corner, al tabat shniya, on the second ring. Shachata shochet. So the shochet, right? The slaughterer would slaughter. V'kibel hamikabel. And the one who was supposed to receive the blood, to capture the blood, he would capture the blood. He would have a special kli that he would hold underneath the neck of the animal, and he would capture the blood as it was coming out. Balo lekaren mizrachit tzfonit, he would come to the northeast corner, the notain mizrachat tzafona, and he would give at the northeast. So what would he be giving?
Blood.
Right. He's going to be throwing blood onto the mizbeach, and for this, he's going to do two throwings, through two sprinklings on two opposite corners. First on the northeast corner, and then on the southwest corner. The notain ma'arava deroma. He'd come to the southwest, and then he would put on the southwest corner. She'arei hadam haya shofech hayesod dromit. And the blood that was left over that he still had in the kli, he would pour that onto the south yesod. So I'm going to try to give you an idea of some of these bits as well. Just a second. Okay. This is sort of a cleaned up version of the Rambam's picture, but that's not what I want to look at. Just a sec. No, went too far. I apologize. I'm not fine. There's a picture here of the mizbeach that we've used in the past. You know what? I'll use this one because I don't want to waste any more time. This is an illustration of the Beit HaMikdash according to the Perush of the Tiferet Yisrael. So here I'm going to blow up this part here. So this is an overhead view of the Mizbeach with the ramp. And this is the northeast corner. And this is the southeast corner. Now you'll notice you have this area here that's sticking out. Oops. this whole area here that's sticking out, and this whole area here that's sticking out, that's because the Mizbeach was not entirely symmetrical. And what you're seeing from the overhead would be the Yesod. The Yesod was on, there was a Yesod on this side and on this side, but not on this side, not over here. I'm going to try to describe that a little bit better later. These are the, over here, these are the rings. They're supposed to be the rings. And they're actually, there's a machloket about exactly how they were laid out. And I'm going to we'll take a look at that in a moment in the Mishnah and Midot. So the first sprinkling though would be here on this corner. And when he would sprinkle, he would stand and sprinkle so that when he would do one sprinkling and some of the blood would go onto the east side and some would go onto the north side. And over here, he would do so that some would come onto the west side and some onto the south side. And so you may remember from the Mishnah in Zvachim that's in the Sidur, which we'll take a quick look at. Okay, so this Mishnah is the Mishnah that we bring in. It's in the end of Korbanot in the davening. Ezehu mekoman shel zvachim. Where is the place that we bring the zvachim, the Korbanot? Kadshei kadoshim shlitatan b'tzafon. So anything that was Kodesh Kodoshim had to be shechted in the north, and that's that area that I showed you that has the rings. It actually starts off talking here about Parvas Yerushalayim on Kippurim, but I want to go down a little bit further. Ha'olah, right? So the Korban Tamid is an Olah. It's Kodshei Kodashim, Shlitata B'tzafon. It was shechted in the north. V'kibul dama b'chisharet B'tzafon. The Kabbalah of the dam that we just described had to be done also there in the north. The dama ta'un shtei matanot shehein arba. Its blood requires two givings, two throwings or sprinklings onto the Mizbeach that are four. In other words, there are two actions, but each action produces two, as it were, results. Because some of the blood is going to, on the first one, some will go north and some will go east, and on the second one, some will go south and some will go west. And it needs to be flayed, it needs to be stripped of its skin, and it has to be cut up, and then it has to be completely burnt. So that's for any Olah. It was also true for the Korban Tamid, and that's what we're talking about now. So let's continue. We'll look at the Bartanur here, and then I'm going to try to fill out some of the information that's being referred to by looking at a couple of other Mishnayot in Masechet Midot. So here, Lo hayu choftin et hataleh. They didn't the sheep, et a tamid, right? So the korban tamid wasn't tied up. What does it mean, koftin? Like I said before, b'shtei yadav la'atzman or b'shtei raglav la'atzman. They didn't tie it or even hold it so that the two front hands would be together and the two hind legs would be together. Kedei shelo la'asot kechukot hagoyim. In order not to do as the non-Jews, as the Ovdei Avodah Zarah used to do. Shekacha hayu osim k'sheshoftim la'avodah zarah, because that's how they used to bind their animals when they were shechting them for idol worship. The Gemara gives some other reasons, but this is the main reason that most Rishonim took, or at least that I saw. Rather, they would be ma'aked. And what's ma'aked? Hayadim haregel ka'akedat Yitzchak. The hand, in other words, the front leg would be with a hind leg, and the other front leg would be with the other hind leg, just like Yitzchak had been bound. So, its head was pointed south. So it was shechted on the north side of the Mizbeach, like any Olah, like we just saw in the Mishnah in Zvachim. And he would tilt the head the head would be pointed south, but its face would be facing west. In other words, the front of the animal was closer to the Mizbeach, and the rear of the animal would have been closer to the northern wall of the Beit HaMikdash, but then the head would be turned so that the head would be facing west. And why did they put the head facing the Mizbeach? She'im yarbitz galalim lo hiyeh samuch lamizbeach. Because if it defecated, then that would be further away. It wouldn't be close to the Mizbeach. The defecation would be further away from the Mizbeach. So the Tamid Shel Shachar, Korban Tamid Shel Shachar, Yanishchat al Karen Tzfonit Ma'aravit. It was shechted on, in other words, nearby the northwest corner. Lefi shebaboker shemesh b'mizrach, v'zorachat kinegda lema'arav. Because in the morning, the sun comes up in the east, and it's shining toward the west. So the Katuv Omer, Shnayim Layom, right? In the Parshat Tamid, it says that you bring two every day. There's a pshat is two every day, but the drasha is Shnayim Layom Kineged Hayom, that you bring two opposite the day, Klomar Neged Hashemesh, opposite the sun. Shashemesh Karuyom. There's a pasuk in Yechezkel that talks about Chashoch Hayom, and it's referring to the sun, that the sun got dark. It was called that the day got dark. So the idea is that when they're shechting, the sunlight is going to be, in the morning, the sunlight will be behind the back of the shochet, right? Because his face is facing west. The sun is on his back on the east. And in the evening, it's going to be the other way, right? Because the sun is going to be coming from the west, so he's going to go to the other end of those tabaot, which we'll talk about in a moment. So in the evening, when the sun was in the west and it was shining toward the east, then the tamid would be shechted on the northeast corner, or at the northeast corner. B'tabat shniya, it would be shechted on the second tabat. Rachok min hamizbeach, that was away or far from the mizbeach. Lefisha mizbeach gavoa uma'apil kulo, because the mizbeach, the mizbeach is 10 amot high, and it casts a shadow, and so they didn't have it right next to the mizbeach. It would be a little bit further away from the mizbeach, so that there would be light. There would be enough light that the shochet could see what he's doing. Yochanan Kohen Gadol hitkin shishas darim shel tabaot. Yochanan Kohen Gadol is mentioned elsewhere in the Mishnah. He did a number of other takanot, and this is one of them, that he affixed 6 sets of tabaot. The whole seder arba tabaot. In each set, there were 4 of these tabaot, 4 of these rings. The arba'a v'yasri mishmarot kohuna, for the 24 divisions of the kohanim who would take turns every week in doing the avodah in the Beit HaMikdash. Vayu kvuot b'ritzpah, they were affixed into the ground, asuyot kamid keshet, and they were like a bow, they were like an arc. Lefi shelo hayu choftim et tamid kedidnan bereish pirkin, since they didn't tie up the legs in front and legs in back, as we learned in the beginning of the chapter. Hayu machnisin savar habahema ba'otan hatabaot b'shat shlita. What they would do is they would put the neck of the animal into the rings, or it's into a ring, into one of the rings at the time that it would be shechted. And then they would stick the head of the ring into the ground. What he means is this: if you can imagine, the ring would be, or this sort of arched piece, one side would be fixed into the ground on probably a kind of a hinge, and they would lift it up, they would put the animal's head in it, and then they would bring it down and stick the other side into the ground. That's what he's describing. It's a little bit, the language is a little bit awkward, but that's what he means. Again, that it would stick the neck of the animal into one of the rings at the time it was going to be shechted, and then they would stick the head of the ring into the ground. In other words, the other side of that ring, or the other side of that arch, would be stuck in the ground. So then they would take, the person who gets the blood, he takes the blood, and he would do the northeast corner, after they would shecht the tamid, which we mentioned a moment ago, that would be done near the northwest corner. Holech litzad mizrach. Then he would walk eastward. V'omeid ba'aretz. He would be standing on the ground. Zorek hadam b'chli lamata min chut asikra. He would be throwing the blood below the crimson thread. There was a crimson thread that hung all the way around the mizbeach to divide the upper half from the lower half. Certain korbanot, the blood gets sprinkled above the chut sikra, and certain korbanot, it's below the sikra. And so here, this is below the sikra. V'noten shtei matanot shehein arba. And he would do 2 throwings that would be 4. One that was like 2 in the east corner. V'holech l'ma'aravit dromit. In other words, so he would be in the northeast corner. He would throw the blood below the sikra, and then he would walk westward and then southward, and he would be at the opposite corner. And then he would do another throwing of the blood that would be like two throwings, right? With one throwing, he would throw some on the west and some on the south. Okay. Are there any questions? Or is that clear?
It sounds pretty clear.
Okay, I'm going to try to make it a little bit more clear. I want to look for a moment at the Mishnah and Midot. This is the 5th chapter. It's the last chapter of Midot, and I'm going to just read through some of this, but mainly I want to get to. Actually, hold on. Let's look at another. There's a Mishnah here in the 3rd chapter of Midot that talks about these tabaot. See here, it's Midot Perek Gimel Mishnah Hey v'tabaot hayu litzvono shel mizbeach. So there were rings to the north of the mizbeach. Shisha starim shel arba arba. There were 6 rows, each row had 4. V'yesh omrim, and some people say arba'a shel sheish. Some people say that there were 4 rows that each had 6 rings. Right? Either way, there were 24. She'alein shochtin et hakadoshim. That's where they would shech the kadoshim. Beit HaMitbachayim haya bitzfono shel mizbeach. The place of the, I don't know exactly how they translate this, like the place of the butchering, would be just north of would be north of the mizbeach. V'alav shmona amudin nanasin. I don't remember if we talked about this or not, but there would be. Okay, so there were these 8 columns. They were 8 short columns. Revi'in shel erez al gabehen, and there were these square blocks of cedar on top of them. Unkliot shel barzel hayu kvuin behen, and there were iron hooks that were put into them. This is where we'll see. This is where they're going to hang the animal to do the initial flaying, to remove the skin. There were 3 sets for each of the columns. That's what they would hang the animal on. And then they would continue to do the hafshet on the tables that were made of marble that were in between these columns. I'm pointing this out now because we're going to talk about, in a moment, we're going to talk about all of this stuff and exactly how that was done. This Mishnah, the beginning of Perek Hey, this warrants more time and better illustrations. But what the Mishnah is doing here, and if you look at the illustration that I sent you from the Rambam, his illustration is really to illustrate this chapter. Kol ha'azara hayta orech 187 arochav 135. So the entire azara was 185 in length, 185 amot in length, and it was 135 amot in width. And then it's going to tell us exactly where everything was, or to some degree of exactness. Mina Mizrach Lama'arav, from east to west, 187. So how did we get, what was in this 100, what was going lengthwise that filled up this 187 amot? Makom Drisat Yisrael Chadasrei. So the first 11 amot coming from the east as you're heading west, that was where Yisrael could walk up to, right? The first 11 amot, Yisrael could walk up to that point. Makom Drisat Kohanim Chadasrei. And then after that, there was another 11 where Kohanim, where only Kohanim could walk. Hamizbeach Shoshim Ushtaim. So that's 22 amot. Then the Mizbeach is 32 in width. So that's 54. Ben Ha'ulam V'la Mizbeach Esrim Ushtaim. So on the other side of the, right, so we went 32 width of the Mizbeach. That's 50. Yeah, 50, right? It was 22 plus 32, 54. Then there's another 22 amot between the ulam and the mizbeach. So that's 76. Haichal mea ama. And then the whole building of the heichal, which includes the ulam and all of that, that's another 100 amot. That's 176. V'chadesrei ama. So it's 187. There's another 11 that's behind the Beit HaKaporet, which is the Kodesh HaKodeshim. And okay, that's the basic layout. And if you look, I didn't switch to the illustration, but if you look at your illustration, the Rambam actually writes out the midot. Minat Safon l'Daron. If you're coming from the north and going south, it's 135. So how does that go? Hakevesh v'mizbeach shishim u'shtayim. So the kevesh and the mizbeach together, if you're counting from the tip of the kevesh to the other end of the mizbeach, that's 62 amot out of 135. Mina mizbeach letabaot. So from the mizbeach to these tabaot that we're talking about, that's 8 amot. So that's 70 altogether so far. Mekoma tabaot esrim v'arba. The place where the tabaot are, the amount of space that the tabaot take up with the 24 tabaot, that takes up in going in this direction, it takes another 24 amot. So that's 7, that's 94. Mina tabaot the shulchanot is 4. Mina shulchanot v'lananasin arba. So this is telling you also, to give you an idea, that this is the layout. If you start walking from the Mizbeach heading north, then after the Mizbeach, you're going to first come to the Tabaot, and then after the Tabaot, north of the Tabaot will be the Shulchanot. North of the Shulchanot will be these columns. Mina nanasin lakotel azara shmoneh amot, and from the right from the end of where these columns are standing till the wall of the northern wall of the Azara, that's another 8 amot. V'hamotar ben hakevish lakotel u'mekom hananasi. The rest, to fill out that rest of the cheshbon of 135, that would be from, we didn't start walking in this description, we didn't start from the southern wall, but now the rest of the amount of amot that need to be filled out is going to be a combination of the distance from the beginning of the ramp southward and in the northern part, the actual space that the nanasim took up. Okay, I hope that's somewhat clear. It's a lot to sort of take in, but if you go over it and looking at the Rambam's picture, sorry, looking at the Rambam's picture. So now this was also just to help you to understand the picture. If you look at it closely, he gives you all of these midot. So, right, so here, this is the southern wall, this is the northern wall. And he tells you from here to here is 12 amot. And then you have the beginning of the ramp and until the end of the Mizbeach, that's altogether 64. The ramp is 32 and the Mizbeach is 32. Then you have 8 between the Mizbeach and the Tabaot. The Tabaot take up 24. You have then the Shulchanot, and he has it that between the Tabaot and the Kom HaNanasin, the place where the Shulchanot fits into the 8 Amot. And then there's 8 Amot between the wall and the place of the Nanasin, and this is the Beit HaMitbachayim, and that takes up 12 and a half, right? So over here he has, from the beginning here, he says, 12 and a half. That's how the Rambam divides it up. Okay, so I hope this was enlightening. I get into these things, and I'm sorry if it's not more clear. It's a little bit hard to transmit this using only one screen at a time. But let's continue in the Mishnah. I have a feeling I only sent you the first page, but okay, let's continue in the Mishnah, and then I'll switch to something else so you can see the rest. I apologize, I didn't send you enough. We're in Mishnah Bet. Lo haya shober bo et haregel, ela nokvo mitoch arkubo v'tolebo. So he wouldn't break the leg. In other words, so now what's happened? We had the shchita, we had kabbalat hadam, we had zrikat hadam. So the next thing to do is to get the animal, we have now the carcass that has to be prepared so that it can be brought up onto the Mizbeach to be burnt. So he wouldn't break its leg, ela nokvo mitoch arkubo v'tolebo. He would pierce it from inside of the knee and hang it. Hayam afshit v'yorein ad shu magia lechazeh. And so then he would flay, he would strip off the hide and go down until he would get to the chest. Higia lechazeh, once he got to the chest, chatach et harosh unetano lemisha zachabo. Once he got to the chest, he would cut off the head, and he would give that to the person who won that in the lottery to take that onto the kevesh. Chatach et hakra'im, then he would cut the legs, unetanan lemisha zachabahen. Meirak et hahavshet, he would finish stripping. I'm sorry, hang on, I'm gonna have to switch. I prepared it, but I didn't make it in the PDF, so I apologize. But I'll just continue on the screen. Meirakta et hahavshet, he would finish the stripping down more. Kara talev, he would cut out the heart, votzi et damo, rip out the heart and take out its blood. This gets quite graphic. I hope everybody's okay with this. Chatach et yadayim, then he would cut off the hands, in other words, the front legs. Unetanan lemisha zachabahen, he would give those to the one who won those. Allah l'regel hayimanit, he would go up to the right leg. Chatacha, he would cut it, unetana lemisha zachaba, and he would give that right leg to whoever was supposed to get that. Ushtei beitzim mima, and he would give the testicles with it. Kra'ov nimtza kulo galui lefanav. Then he would tear it, and he would now find it's entirely exposed before him. In other words, now the innards are going to be exposed. Natala tapeder, he would take the fat, unetano abet shchitat harosh milamala. He would put it on the place where the head had been shechted on top. Natal et hakravaim, and then he would take the innards in the tanan l'misha zacha behen lahadichan. He would give those to the person who had won to take up the kravayim onto the kevesh lahadichan. He had to go and rinse them. The hakeres madichinota bebeit madichin kol tzarcha. So the keres, the belly, or I guess the lower intestinal parts, those would be completely washed out in the Beit Madichin as much as they needed. The Beit Madichin, I think I can show you. Yeah. So the animal got shechted over here, and then it would be hung up over here. I'm not sure exactly which one they would hang it up on, but maybe also over here. And so when they get to the part where they have to rinse, so whoever takes it, they rinse it here. This is the Beit Madichin here. So it's very close by. They would rinse out the innards at least 3 times. On the so that the karas would be rinsed in the Beit HaMadichin, and then the innards would be rinsed at least 3 times on the tables of marble that were between the amudim, that were between the columns. Okay, let's look at the Bar Tzenura here and try to illuminate this a little more. Lo haya shover bo et haregel, he wouldn't break its leg. Lo haya shover bo et haregel k'derech shetabachin osim. He wouldn't break the leg the way that butchers are accustomed to doing, shemachatrin et haregel im haor shebo, that they cut off the leg with the skin that's on it. Elanokvim mitachat ha'arkuva hanimkeret im harosh tolebo. He would pierce it in the knee that would be closest to the head, and that's how he would hang it. Mafshit haregel im shar habeima, and then he would strip the regel itself. Would strip the leg itself with the rest of the animal. So this tells us, we learn from this that the kra'ayim, that the legs were also part of the stripping. Right? Arkuva with an ayin is the same as arkuva with an aleph, right? So it's like the behind the knee. The skins of olot were not burnt; they were a gift to the kohanim. Right. So then he would do all this stripping and cutting. Because at that point that we discussed, he had not yet stripped the chest, and the skin was still attached to it. So he's hung it up by a leg so that the head is on top. And then he would go down until he gets to the chest. And once he got to the chest, he would cut off the head. And then and then he would cut the legs, and give those to the one who got them. And then and then at that point he had to still keep going down to finish stripping off the skin. That's right. So he would strip off the skin, and then he would rip out the heart, and then take the hands and give them to the person who got the hands. And when he came to the right leg, it was the lower right leg, he would cut that off and give it to whoever was supposed to get that, and give him the testicles. Then he would tear it. I think it means though he would cut it with a knife. But at that point, he's gone all the way down, and now all of the innards are exposed. So then Natalat Peder. The peder is the chalev. The chalev is the fat. Natanah Beit HaShlita, the Bartanura says, he puts it on the place where the head was cut off. V'zohi derech kavod shamala. This was out of respect for the one above. Shelo yira'eh lichluch dam hashchita. This was so that we won't see the mess that was made from the blood from the shchita. So they would cover up the Beit HaShchita with the fat. V'keres midichinota mina perish betocha. So the belly, and below the belly, I guess, right, would be that whole area, the lower intestinal area. That was to be, they had to remove the waste that was in it. Bifnei atzma. That would be rinsed off separately in the Beit HaMadichin. Belishka shaita b'mikdash. V'lo medichinot. And that lishka is actually, it's mentioned a little bit further on in the 5th chapter there in Masachet Midot. V'lo medichinota im shar hakravayim, and wasn't washed with the other innards, shalot tanfem, so as not to make them dirty. All right, so where the waist, where the kaki was, that would be rinsed separately, and not with the kravayim. And that's why the kravayim were rinsed at least 3 times on the tables, and the keres was rinsed in the Beit HaMadichin. And the kravayim were rinsed at least 3 times. She'ein hari'i yotzei mihen el b'docha k'fi shehin dakim. The waste that was inside of the kravayim had to be rinsed 3 times, because they had to get out all of the kaki that was in them. I may not have explained this correctly. The perish that's in the keres isn't the kaki. It must be the undigested food, or the semi-digested food. And in the kravayim is where that would be the lower intestine. And that's where the ri'i is. That's where the feces were. B'miuta, it would be at least 3 times. L'chol ha'pachot, v'im ratzah l'osif l'dichan yoter mishlosh pamim mosif. So they would be rinsed at least 3 times, and if he wanted to rinse them more, then he could rinse them more.
Shel?
Yes.
The whole description is quite gruesome. After that, I would like to be a vegetarian.
Yeah. Do it.
Yeah. I was debating about how much we should go into this, but I thought, you know what? Everybody should know this. Now you understand why.
To be a vegetarian?
Well, you know that Rav Kook wrote that that eventually, right? I found I'm not very expert at all in what Rav Kook wrote or said, but I did find where he writes about that, and he does, if I remember correctly, he says that will be eventually, and that we will not bring animal sacrifices, because he says that in the time of the Geulah, all of the creation's consciousness will be raised. Our consciousness will be raised, and the consciousness of animal life will also be raised. So their consciousness will be raised to a point that is similar to the way we see ourselves now. So we will see them as not really less than humans. We will see them not really less than humans. And so just as we would not make human sacrifice, we would not make animal sacrifice. I remember, that's all, basically all I remember about what he says about that. And of course, it's quite interesting. I didn't prepare any of that for the shiur tonight, but maybe someday we'll look into it. The other thing I will say about this, though, is yes, this is gruesome, but of course, anytime you're eating meat, there's a process like this that went on, right? This is exactly what happens. And one of the things I was just thinking about myself is the bringing of animals. First of all, there's a question like, why do we have animal sacrifice, right? And we know, I'm sure everybody knows that the Rambam says in the Moreh Nevuchim that this was sort of a way of weaning us, because, you know, the Ovdei Avodah Zarah had animal sacrifice. But that doesn't tell me the whole story, because why did anybody have animal sacrifices? What was that about? And why these particular animals? So the animals that we use, you know, that were used in the Beit HaMikdash were all domesticated animals. You didn't bring a chaya. You didn't bring a
Puts me off. Puts me off. Puts me to bird.
Well, I want to tell you, even the oath, though, those were raised. In other words, they would have, they would raise them. They had, you know, they would raise the doves, and that's how. So, but I understand why you say that, right? Oath and chaya, in a sense, do have something in common that maybe behemah doesn't. But I think also the Torah treats oath and the korbanot of oath are also different in other ways. For example, there's no shchita for oath, right? The fowl were not shechted. They were killed by malika, which, if you know what that is, you might think that's even more gruesome, right? But the Kohen had a very long, hard fingernail, and he would pierce the back of the neck. Although, if you think about that, you might argue that was even a more humane way than shchita, right? Because as soon as you pierce the spinal cord, the animal is immediately dead. It's an instant death. Whereas with shchita, there's a few seconds before it actually dies. I don't think, I'm not an animal. I don't know what it's like to be shechted. But I think the shchita, even though it wasn't instantaneous, I think was also a very quick way to die, because the moment that the animal gets slaughtered, it's getting slaughtered with a super smooth knife. So, and I just saw somebody describe this on Facebook. They did a very good job. It's like if you cut yourself with a very sharp blade, you don't feel the cut immediately. It takes a moment to register. If it's like a saw blade, then you feel it more. But if you have like a very sharp blade that cuts you, like a paper cut or something like that, you don't always feel it right away. So if you can imagine, the animal gets shechted with this extremely sharp blade. It doesn't really feel the blade coming in. And then it loses a huge amount of blood almost instantly. So it basically goes unconscious. And by the time that happens, it's already lost so much blood that it's going to be dead. So the gruesomeness of it is, I mean, however we think about it in terms of the animal, but it's those of us that we witness it. And to us, it's gruesome. I'm assuming for the Kohanim who did this every day, they were kind of used to it. Just like the way a butcher would be used to doing this. But before I say anything else, so does anybody have any ideas about this, about why when we're talking about behemoth, so why do we use domesticated animals and not wild animals? What are we doing when we're bringing korbanot that we would want to, that the Torah wants us to bring behemoth?
I mean, it's a couple of observations.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I
Okay.
can.
I mean, the first is that we have a relationship with the animal from day one. I mean, if an animal is designated for a korban, it is kept and it is guarded from a very early age, and we actually follow the whole process. So I mean, I think there's a kind of intimacy with the animal. Yeah, when you're also guarding it to make sure that it doesn't get a moom of any kind. You're watching it carefully. You're taking care of it. So there is a kind of intimacy, and leading clear up through to the very end where you do smicha on the animal. So I think there's a kind.
Not for every animal.
Not for every, but not for every animal, but for
as we see, there wasn't smicha on the korban tamid.
Okay.
Okay.
But I mean, leaving that aside, there still is a kind of intimacy. There's a kind of relationship with the animal that we would not have that kind of intimacy with a wild animal.
Okay.
I mean,
so I think that's a very important point. And so based on that, how do you relate that to the idea of bringing it as a korban in the Beit HaMikdash? I might argue that why don't I bring a chaya that I don't have any kind of personal relationship with to bring as a sacrifice, so that there won't be any kind of any kind of attachment to the animal? Why do I want that intimacy?
So I think we actually think about sort of the etymology of korban. The words, it is related to the words for closeness, to intimacy. So in some sense, I mean, the very word korban suggests that the intimacy is desirable or even necessary. It's an integral part of the process.
Okay, and why?
I mean, I think on different levels. I mean, there is a sense, I mean, going back to the Akedah, there is a sense, okay, it's this animal instead of me, or this animal instead of, my son.
I do think that's the main point. It reminds me, lahavdil, elef havdalot, but when I was in 9th grade biology, we had to dissect a fetal pig. And we had everybody had like a manual that the teacher had prepared about how to do it. And this is like burned into my memory. The first words of this manual were, "This fetal pig is here in lieu of you." And what he meant by that is, the reason that they teach biology students how to cut up a fetal pig is because the inside of a pig is almost exactly identical to the inside of a human being. I think with the exception of the spleen, it looks exactly the same. And so so we're not talking about pigs here, but yes, I think this is clear, and I think you've made the argument very well that the animals, so we use domesticated animals because already we have a relationship with each particular animal in the way you describe, but also as humans, you know, as an agricultural society, society as a whole has a relationship with these animals. These animals are part of the human experience, and it's part of the human economy. And the wild animal is not something, you know, once people have established agricultural civilizations, wild animals are something you would get maybe on occasion, right? But that's not necessarily what you're going to depend on for your food source. But domesticated animals are things that you depend on for your food source. And we have this very close relationship with them for all of these reasons, the reasons that you said, and for economic reasons. And so if I'm going to be, so you talk about korban on the one hand, right? Korban is, as you say, is related to the word karov, which means closeness. And it also is where we get the verb lahakriv, right? To offer forth, to make something come close, in this sense, to make something come close to Hashem. So this is like giving something of ourselves to Hashem. And as I think about the Mishnayot that we were just looking at and how graphic they are, and all the different, and the care that is taken to cut up the animal in a certain particular way, it's as if we are supposed to look at all the different parts of the body and appreciate each one of them unto itself. That all of these this is what makes up an animal, which also are the same things that make up us humans. And we are placing that on the Mizbeach. That is what we are offering to Hashem. We are offering in that sense of ourselves in this very bloody and graphic way, right? It's a very visceral, literally visceral kind of offering. And Michael, I'm sorry if I cut you off, but you can continue if you wanted to say more.
The only other point is that, I mean, I'm largely vegetarian, and I actually don't find, I actually find this more tender than gruesome in an odd way. Like, I don't find this so disturbing.
And why not? How can you say why it doesn't seem so disturbing?
Because, I think there is a kind of tenderness to it. There is a kind of, very deliberate, it's not taking, I'm thinking about sort of like different ways about there's different ways about thinking about you killing animals. Or think about sacrifice. And one is taking joy in the killing. Another way is to think about the pain, either as something which I think shows up in some Western, it shows up, I think, certainly in Roman art, and shows up in many, and also many Western artistic conventions where, the pain, when blood is shown, it signifies pain. And here it really signifies something very different. I think it really, there is something very deliberate, there's something very precise. It is.
Yeah, no, I will also say, along those lines, what's the first thing that happens upon Shtita? What's the first avodah that we do after the Shtita?
Catching the blood.
We capture the blood, and the blood is also the offering. I'm sorry, go ahead.
But in Vaikra, blood is the life.
And blood is the life. And in fact, there's a halachic concept which is pertinent to here, that the blood that's thrown on the Mizbeach has to be dam hanefesh. And what is dam hanefesh? It's dam shahanefesh yotzeit ba. It's the blood that when the animal loses too much of it, it dies. As opposed to blood that may be absorbed into the skin or into the fur or something like that. That's specifically mentioned earlier in the Mishnah and Svachim, And it's based on the pasuk that you're alluding to. Ki hadam hu hanefesh. So even though it's very bloody, and blood is a signifier, we associate blood with death, and blood, it's also associated with certain kinds of tumah. But here what we're doing, we're acknowledging the death, and we're trying to take care of the blood. So of course, some of the blood is going to be spurted, and some of it's going to get cleaned off of the shulchanot and off of the ritzpah and so on and so forth. But we're capturing most of the main lifeblood, and that's going to be part of the offering as well. So I don't know. I think it's worth being graphic because it's an experience that none of us has had, and none of us is likely to have, because as much as I would like the Beit HaMikdash to be rebuilt tomorrow, I'm not so sure it'll happen. So what we can do is try to imagine this. But
it shouldn't happen that way. That's what I feel.
Well, you know what? That's an interesting point, which I'll say something about that in a moment. But what Michael, what you're saying is right. And there's a lot of care being done here. The Gemara talks about the idea that prior to Matan Torah, that there's a machloket about whether exactly when shechita becomes a mitzvah outside of the Beit HaMikdash, but there's an alternative way that was used to kill animals. That was nechira. In nechira, you may guess from the word nechirin, they would stick a knife through the nostrils of the animal, like through the nose, and kill it like that, like pierce its skull like that. And that was a much more gruesome death. So the Torah mandates shechita, and initially it mandates shechita for korbanot, and then later on in Dvarim it says that when you come into the land and you want to eat meat and you don't want to go all the way to the Beit HaMikdash, you still have to do shechita. And what else do you have to do? What do you do with the blood? Here we know what we do with the blood. We take the blood and we sprinkle it onto the Mizbeach, and if there's some left over, it gets poured onto the side of the Mizbeach. What do you do with blood from Chaya?
You bury it.
You bury it. You have to bury it. And I just was thinking about this today or yesterday when I was preparing, that what does the Torah call the Mizbeach initially? It's Mizbeach Adama. It's a Mizbeach Adama. So we're always, in the Beit HaMikdash, we're always taking the blood and returning it to the Adama. In the Beit HaMikdash, we do it on the Mizbeach. And if you're outside of the Mikdash, then you literally put it on Adama. So and I think it circles back to this idea that the animal is there in lieu of us, because we are of the Adama and we return to the Adama, right? Ultimately, that's the fate and the cycle of man. So there's a kind of a reliving or a redoing of that every time a korban is brought in the Beit HaMikdash.
So for me, we have this from Rav Kook, the idea that in the future, in the third temple, perhaps it's enough to offer mincha. So mincha, like in vegetarian, as sacrificing without meat and without killing and without slaughtering. And gaps in the limitation of to become life by giving life. So this changing by reconciliation and chatzat and all this to purify or to get over the sin, you must bring and to become the become near to get again the clearness to the nearness to Hashem, it's necessary to bring by the way of slaughtering, by giving life instead of us. So this is like a circle of coming life and giving life. And it seems to me the limitation of Olam Hazeh, but perhaps in Olam Haba it's not necessary. We can escape out of this written giving, and so in the same way. So you know, the Christianity, one of the main thing is to criticize the temple, this thing, and to say, okay, that's enough. Let us stop this circle of sacrificing, because the last sacrifice was Jesus. Okay, that's a very strong argument. And what is our kind of defend and to offer something instead of this, and perhaps to say, okay, in future we can escape and okay.
Well, you know, it's getting late.
The concept of Yoma and Yom Kippur also, we have this deep concept of, okay, we there is necessary, so Hirsch and all the others, Mefarshim, emphasize so much. We have this changement of our life giving instead of we are guilty and we have to give our life, but instead of that we give the archetypal part, we give the animal to become to gain again the nearness to Hashem, become near and close forever. Yeah, Lakri. Okay, but it seems a very, very problematic concept. Why it is necessary to come near to God by slaughtering, by killing animals? So what is not enough to get something out from our worldly, from our whatever possession? Yeah, that's a very, very
well
question for Judaism.
It's an important question. I think it goes back to Cain and Hevel and what each of them offered, right? It starts there. Yeah. But so I'm going to end the shir now because it's 9 o'clock. I think this is a theme that we'll have to discuss more. And by the way, we haven't finished talking about the whole dismemberment of the animal. We'll continue that next time. The other thing, though, I just want to say, not just about animal sacrifice in particular, but the idea of sacrifice in general. Mm-hmm. So there is this idea that we need to offer something to Hashem, and because it's 9 o'clock, I don't want to go into it now, but I do want to discuss that next time. I think maybe we'll do a similar thing. We'll move on in the Mishnah and try to finish out a better picture of exactly what's going on. But I do want everybody to think about this, and if you want, you can, bring the Forshim or whatever, but just understand what is this basic idea of Korban. And I think one of the other reasons that we raise certain questions is because our lives are very different now than they were, 3,500 years ago, or even 100 years ago. Even 100 years ago, even 200 years ago. Right? Up until what? Up until the early 20th century, or even up until the middle of the 20th century, most of the economy was still agrarian. People still lived mainly on farms. And these were masim b'chol yom, right? There was nothing exceptional here about slaughtering the chicken or slaughtering the cow or slaughtering whatever other animal you had. You would do it not necessarily every day, but you would do it periodically. Certainly chickens you would do on a periodic basis, most likely, or some kind of fowl that you were raising. And now we have, in a sense, we've removed ourselves from that, right? We let this small minority of the population, they're the ones who deal with that. All we see is the meat in the store, or the meat at the restaurant. We don't have to deal with all of these things. So we've also lost a certain kind of sensitivity, which I think Michael was kind of alluding to earlier, right? And there's a difference between now what we think of as raising animals in factory farms, and if you actually had a farm and you actually raised an animal, there's a very different relationship. So
I mean, I've actually spent a good part of my life actually working with animals and raising animals, and in fact, also, you know, the full life cycle. And I think
to the bloody end.
To the bloody end, and it, yeah, and I think maybe that's why I was finding kind of tenderness in this, because in fact I have been with animals as they were dying.
So yes, so let's talk more about this next week. And in the meantime, I wish everybody a good week.
Before we actually, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but by a coincidence, the themes that we're discussing today regarding animal sacrifice actually dovetail with the reading I'm giving on Sunday. So,
does everybody know? Did you invite everybody?
I don't know if I had everybody's email. I don't know if it's appropriate, but if I can send out the invitation, if it's appropriate, if people are interested.
Michael's giving a poetry reading this coming Sunday.
And specifically, it actually is on very, very closely related themes to our conversation today.
And yeah, so Michael, do you have Shira's email? I can give you her email.
Yeah, if you could send it, that would be great.
Okay. Okay. Laila Tov.
Good night. Thank you.
Laila Tov.
Bye-bye.